In 1859, a single silver strike in the Nevada desert triggered the largest urban explosion the American West had ever seen. Within 5 years, Virginia City had a population of 30,000 people crammed into a canyon above the desert floor. That kind of pressure, money, violence, and altitude leaves a mark on a place that does not wash out in 150 years. We spent a full day and one very long night on C Street finding out exactly what that mark looks and feels like. What happened after midnight is the part we are still trying to explain to ourselves. The Comstock Lode didn't just make fortunes, it physically built a city out of desperation, ambition, and imported timber on a treeless ridge. The buildings still standing on C Street were never meant to last this long, and somehow that makes them feel more permanent than anything built to endure. Getting here means leaving the flat valley floor and climbing into something that feels genuinely unfinished, like the mountain never quite agreed to the arrangement. You leave Reno on US 395 South, and for the first 20 minutes, it feels like nothing has changed. The highway is flat, the traffic is ordinary, and the desert sits wide and indifferent on both sides of you. Then you turn east on State Route 341, and the road immediately starts climbing into the Virginia range. The sagebrush thickens, the pavement narrows, and the shoulders disappear like the modern world is quietly withdrawing its hospitality. Every switchback pulls you higher above the valley floor, and the air takes on a dryness that feels older than the asphalt beneath you. By the time the canyon walls close in, you're not driving through scenery, you're driving through pressure. The town doesn't announce itself with a welcome sign or a parking lot, it just appears, clinging to the hillside like it never considered leaving. What you feel in that moment isn't nostalgia, it's the specific weight of a place that survived on violence and silver and sheer human stubbornness. In 1859, two struggling prospectors found silver in a canyon that had no business holding anything valuable at all. The ore they pulled out wasn't a promising vein, it was the richest single silver deposit ever discovered in American history. Within 3 years, a city of 20,000 people had been carved into the side of Mount Davidson at 6,000 feet. There was no water, no timber, no flat ground, and no logical reason for anyone to stay, and yet they did. The Comstock Lode didn't just fund Nevada statehood, it bankrolled the Union side of the Civil War with hard cash when the North needed it most. San Francisco's financial district was built almost entirely on Comstock silver, and the men who controlled it became the most powerful people on the continent. But the wealth that built those marble banks and gilded mansions came out of tunnels where men worked in 150-degree heat for $3 a day. The shafts went down 2,000 feet, deeper than any mine in the world at that point in time. Hundreds of men never came back up, and Virginia City buried them quietly in the hillside above town. The city that shouldn't exist was built on the backs of people history mostly forgot to name, and the streets up here still know it. C Street looks like a movie set, but nobody built it to look this way. It just survived. The storefronts running along this ridge were raised in the 1860s and 1870s, mostly after fire took the earlier versions. What you're walking past isn't reconstruction or replica. It's the actual bones of a city that made more money per square foot than almost anywhere in America. The cast iron facades and the recessed doorways weren't decorative choices, they were fireproofing, because Virginia City burned and rebuilt itself so many times that the architecture eventually started fighting back. Most of the buildings still carry their original footprints, which means the sidewalk you're standing on follows the same line as the one a silver millionaire walked in 1875. The tourist shops and the saloons occupy those spaces now, and there's something quietly honest about that. Commerce replaced commerce. Appetite replaced appetite. What the storefronts are hiding isn't history exactly, it's continuity. The same hunger that built this street is the reason it's still standing, still open, still taking your money. The Comstock Lode didn't just make men rich. It killed them in numbers that still feel hard to believe. Between 1860 and 1880, Virginia City buried more people per capita than almost any other settlement in the American West. Miners died underground from cave-ins, from bad air, from heat that reached 150 degrees at the deepest shafts. They died from the machinery that pulled them up and from the dynamite that cleared the rock ahead of them. Above ground, the violence was just as methodical. Gunfights, yes, but also fires, typhoid, smallpox, and a poverty that left men with nowhere to go but down. The cemetery on the hill above town holds over 1,000 documented graves, and historians believe the actual number is significantly higher. Many of the dead were young, most were migrants, and a surprising number were children who never made it past their second winter. These weren't casualties of a frontier myth. They were workers, families, and drifters caught inside an industrial machine that moved too fast to be careful. The weight of that history doesn't stay in the cemetery. It settled into the building still standing on C Street, and it's still there. The strangest thing about Virginia City's ghost stories is how many of them share the same specific details. Different witnesses, different decades, different buildings, and yet the same cold drafts in sealed rooms, the same footsteps on empty staircases. The Silver Queen Hotel collects reports of a woman in period dress who appears at the end of a hallway and simply does not move. Guests describe her standing still long enough that they go to speak to her, and then she's gone. The Delta Saloon has its own account. A bartender who worked there for 11 years reported hearing his name called, clearly, in a room he'd just confirmed was empty. That kind of testimony is harder to wave away than a blurry photograph or a cold feeling you can't place. What makes these accounts difficult to dismiss is the pattern. Not one person, not one night, but dozens of independent reports describing the same behavior in the same locations. The buildings themselves seem to hold something, like the violence and grief soaked into the wood never fully dried. Whether you call it residual energy or mass suggestion, something in these structures keeps producing the same stories. And the locals who live here year-round don't talk about it the way tourists do. They talk about it the way you describe a neighbor you've learned to leave alone. We stayed in Virginia City overnight, and we went in with a policy of not performing belief or disbelief. Around 2 in the morning, on C Street, the production sound recorder picked up a voice that none of us heard in the room. It wasn't dramatic, no words, no name called out, just a low, sustained tone that the recorder caught and our ears missed entirely. We reviewed the file 4 times before anyone said anything, and even then the conversation was quiet and careful. Nobody reached for an explanation that felt satisfying, and that restraint wasn't cowardice, it was the only honest response available to us. The building we were in dates to 1876, and it has housed a saloon, a boarding house, and at least 2 documented deaths within its walls. Whether those facts connect to what we recorded is a question we genuinely cannot answer. What we can say is that Virginia City does something to your attention. It sharpens it, unsettles it, makes the ordinary feel like it's carrying more weight than it should. That feeling isn't manufactured by gift shops or ghost tour scripts. It rises from the ground itself, from the shafts and the silence underneath. And if you're wondering whether any of that weight still matters to the people who actually live here, it does, in ways that have nothing to do with tourism. The drive back down the mountain feels different after you've spent real time inside that town. You carry something out with you, not a souvenir, not a photograph, but a recalibrated sense of where you actually live. Northern Nevada wasn't built on clean ambition or careful planning. It was built on silver, sweat, and a spectacular amount of human recklessness. Virginia City is where that recklessness left its most permanent mark. And the mark is still there, in the wood, in the stone, in the faces of people who chose to stay. Most historic sites ask you to imagine the past. Virginia City doesn't ask anything. It just refuses to let the past leave. That refusal is what makes the drive worth taking, not once, but again, and then again after that. Northern Nevada travelers don't need another scenic overlook. They need a place that tells the truth about this land.